Wrestle Machine query results for viewer requests. Sid vs Arnold. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. January 31, 1994 Observer Newsletter. Dusty out as WCW Booker, sleaziest pay-per-view ever, more Sid vs ARN by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228 January 31, 1994. Royal Rumble 94. Thumbs up 120 votes, 28.9%. Thumbs down 262 votes, 63.1%. In the middle 33 votes, 0.0%. Best match poll. Hearts vs Quebecers 108 votes. Royal Rumble 41 votes. Tatanka vs Bigelow 32 votes. Yokozuna vs Undertaker 30 votes. Ramon vs IRS 17 votes. Worst match poll. Undertaker vs Yokozuna 131 votes. Royal Rumble 51 votes. Tatanka vs Bigelow 39 votes. Ramon vs IRS 29 votes. Based on phone calls and fax messages to the Observer as of Tuesday morning, 1:25. Margin of error, who really knows? After a 3-year run, the results of which were rapidly declining house show business and overall declining television ratings, Dusty Rhodes' tenure as booker for World Championship Wrestling came to a close last week. Rhodes officially resigned early in the week. No reasons were given for the change, although Rhodes' ideas had been overruled several times of late, which had rendered him nearly powerless when it came to booking the top of the pay-per-view shows, which was really his most important job. The official word seems to be the booking will be handled by a committee composed of but not limited to Bill Shaw, Eric Bischoff, Mike Gossett, Greg Gagne, Robert Welch, Colonel Rob Parker, and Ric Flair. WCW has frequently gone to committees in between bookers, and the result has always been chaos, to the point the wrestlers themselves would ask 3 different committee members what the finish was for a match and get 3 different answers. Ultimately a booker will be chosen. From an official standpoint, Rhodes will remain with WCW in the position of senior consultant, whatever that is supposed to mean, but unofficially he will be back in front of the camera in a talent position, which means either as an announcer, manager or wrestler, although with the possible exception of a short gimmick run, I'd suspect the wrestler position can be ruled out. If nothing else, the 1994 Royal Rumble is going to be the subject of a lot of controversy and polarized views. The vehemence in the phone calls to the Observer was like no show in recent memory. Those who didn't like the show, which was a greater than 2-to-1 majority, hated it, with numerous calls saying it was the worst pay-per-view show of all time and many remarks that they expected this to be a 100% thumbs down poll. Yet of those who gave it a thumbs up, very few gave it a marginal thumbs up, and some thought it was one of the best pay-per-view show ever. I guess it comes down to the debate of whether pro wrestling should be a worked sporting event with showmanship involved that one can attempt to suspend disbelief during, or that it is nothing more than a Broadway show with oversized actors using a wrestling ring as a set. From a wrestling standpoint, the show had only 1 good match, 2 average to slightly below average matches, only 1 finish out of 5, an average battle royal with no winner that was nothing more than a build-up to the latest telephone line scam, and was either highlighted or lowlighted by the most unique finish of a title match in history. The title match featured someone purportedly dying, levitating in mid-air, and then going to heaven but vowing to resurrect one day. From a production standpoint, it was well above the norm, and you can't say the show wasn't creative. Creative is often good, but not necessarily good in a business where some of the most successful promotions in U.S. wrestling history from a business standpoint, the old St. Louis office, the American Wrestling Alliance and the 1970s WWF come to mind immediately, have been the least creative, and even today 2 of the most successful, All Japan and UFI, are 2 of the least creative. After everything that has taken place, the idea that something surrealistic or something that exposes the business is going to kill the business today when it comes to the 2 top promotions simply for being an expose or surrealistic is an outdated notion that has been proven wrong time after time. Those who support those offices have gone through a product that can't be taken as reality, even by those who want to. Wrestling in some form will always be around and always have its ups and downs. But this does make it very difficult to promote a style based on realism in this country and have it marketable to all but the most hardcore and the most dense. This has created today's problem for the smaller companies. Much of the viewing audience, potential ticket-buying audience, is unmoved by angles, no matter how good or bad they are presented, because they don't take anything they see on a wrestling show seriously. Anyone who argued that the WCW exploding boat angle was stupid and thought the finish of the Undertaker-Yokozuna match was anything but, is judging things by a double standard. It is true that the WWF's last attempt at the supernatural, Papa Shango Voodoo angle in 1992, was a bomb, so we'll have to see where this one goes. If you like it or dislike it depends more on what your own version of what pro wrestling is. It only made me cringe for one reason. To anyone in this country who is attempting to promote pro wrestling as anything but a Broadway stage show, it was a nail in their coffin, and it's a coffin that has been shut on many of them already. And one of the prime reason the talent depth in the big promotions is the lowest it has ever been is the big promotions have been putting nails in the smaller territories' coffins for so many years now, that all but a few are dead. And no scriptwriter can simply write a few words and resurrect that. This was also the sleaziest pay-per-view in history, although the trend it started is likely to continue from both promotions. While plugging the 900 line during big shows has been going on for years in both WWF and WCW, this was the first show where it appeared the main emphasis after simply getting the customers $24.95 or $29.95, was to then get as much more money as possible before the end of the show, and then work a main event finish designed mainly to lead to the latest phone scam of the week. Whether it was desperation or greed, it reeked of both. It's one thing to give the viewer at home a chance to hear something they can't, exclusive interviews or a chance to talk to a star by paying extra. It is another to withhold key storyline information unless they pay extra to receive it. It is yet another to tell viewers they can vote for something and that their vote is part of an election to determine how the storyline is written when in fact the vote has no determination as to a storyline that had already been written well before anyone asked them to vote. From a purely capitalistic standpoint, WWF has to be credited since the 900 line did huge business during the show, and on paper this week's scam looks to be the best scam of all. But by running the Bret Hart angle and telling fans they'll have updates on his medical condition, something significant to the show since Hart was advertised in the Rumble to begin with by the promotion, only if they pay extra, or keeping secret the order of entry except to those who paid extra, it sets a precedent that is only going to get even more sleazy as the years go by. To tell people to vote on something and that their vote determines the next step in the storyline when in fact it has no bearing is outright consumer fraud, whether it fits the legal definition of the term or not. How long will it be before a show goes off the air with a match in progress and you have to call the 900 line to hear the finish? How long before you do a disputed finish on a match and ask fans to call a 900 line to decide a finish and work the results of the 900 line? WCW a few years back already did a gimmick where it had a title change on The Clash, Steamboat and Rhodes beating Anderson and Zbyszko, and then told people to call the hotline to find it if they weren't going to reverse the decision. Jerry Jarrett in 1988 on a much smaller scale did a phone scam telling fans to vote for a referee in a Jerry Lawler-Curt Hennig match and, as a way to build up phone calls, told fans that a block of voters from Minnesota had voted for Kurt's father and he had a sizable lead and that they needed the Memphis vote to come through and get Jackie Fargo as the referee for the match. WWF did a Royal Rumble without a winner and on Monday night told them they could pay more to vote to influence who got the title shot when booking decisions had almost surely been made. The decision on who gets the title shot will be announced on the weekend television. My suspicion, nobody tells me anything or else they get in trouble, is that Hart will get the nod in Jack Tunney's announcement but a subsequent angle will cause him to pull out, giving Luger the match. Although the shaving time in the Rumble, which was announced before the Rumble started by Vince McMahon to the audience, actually made for a better match because of the talent depth problem, the finish exemplified another problem. Despite more money and more television time and more effort being spent to push Lex Luger as not only the next champion but the next Hulk Hogan, it just doesn't work. Sure, the guy gets the requisite babyface pop coming out of the dressing room. And truthfully, the ability to maintain heat during his matches, which Luger's headline matches at the arena lack, or decibel level of the cheering for him has probably little correlation to drawing power. But Luger is not a draw, which is the key point. Bret Hart is a better wrestler, which is a point nobody would argue. Hart is more popular, which is a factor in drawing but not an all-inclusive factor. The truth is, making Hart champion, which seems to be the popular alternative to Luger, won't make a difference at the box office. Whatever summer business WWF will do, it'll roughly do the same with either Hart or Luger on top. However, the problem is, any Hart-Luger confrontation exposes Luger's lack of deep-rooted popularity to the marks. Not his lack of ability. The fact that deep down the rest of the marks don't buy the gimmick. After everyone was eliminated, Hart and Luger showdown lasted all of 24 seconds. Any longer and Luger would have been turned strong heel to the fans at home even if he did nothing that would garner such a reaction. It was already happening live. The difference in reaction to the announcements of who had won the Rumble, Luger got an initial pop drowned out by loud boos, Hart got all cheers, was apparent to everyone live, although with the music quickly cut off, it wasn't as apparent to the people watching on pay-per-view. However, unless a change in plans is made immediately, and this is the key, Titan is going into WrestleMania for the first time with the headline match not being the match people are dying to see. This year's Mania will be the lowest buy rate in history for a Mania no matter what is on top, but clearly Luger Yokozuna is not in the people's eyes, the dream match they've been waiting 6 months for, as was the reaction the company's scriptwriters wanted people to have when the decision was made to go in this direction in August. If the initial storyline isn't changed, and Luger does get the title, it appears it won't be for the long term and Hart will have it by the end of 1994, but guaranteed when all the effort was made during last summer, it wasn't to create an interim champ to be the middleman to get the title back to Bret Hart. Rumble drew a legit sellout 14,500 in Providence, Rhode Island at press time. We have no concrete buy rate estimates other than it appeared to be significantly up from Royal Rumble and in the 1.0 range. A Brooklyn Brawler pinned Jim Powers in the dark match. 1. Tatanka pinned Bam Bam Bigelow with a flying body press off the top rope in 8-12. Tatanka was minus the red stripe in his hair. Apparently the dye job was causing too rapid hair loss. Some good spots by Bigelow. A little too much in the way of wrist holds for an 8 o'clock opener and the timing on the high spots was a little off. Bigelow pulled out a Vader trick, missing a moonsault to lead to Tatanka's finisher. 1 3/4 stars. 2. Quebecers kept the WWF Tag Titles beating Bret and Owen Hart in 1648. The first 7 o'clock saw the Harts dominate. It was Bret's turn to sell, but it was short-lived because he got the hot tag to Owen at 9 o'clock. Owen after some aerial moves got Jacques in the sharpshooter 30 seconds later, but Pierre made the save and Owen was worked over for about a minute before the hot tag to Bret. As Bret was about to come off the ropes, Johnny Polo opened up the ropes and Bret took a bump to the floor and started selling the knee grate. Jacques hit the knee with a chair and later a broom as Owen distracted everyone else. Bret was actually out of the ring for nearly 3 minutes selling the knee with the count continually being interrupted. Finally Owen put Bret back in the ring. Pierre came off the top rope with a leg drop to the back of Hart's head, but when they went for their double team flip off the top finisher, Bret moved. Bret had the chance to tag Owen but instead went for the sharpshooter on Pierre, but his knee couldn't hold the move. The referee then stopped the match, ruling Bret couldn't continue. After the match Owen yelled at the fallen Bret and finally kicked his bad knee. Bret wound up doing a stretcher job with Stan Lane telling fans to call the hotline to find out his condition. Owen then did a backstage interview on the video wall broadcast while they were carrying Bret out, calling Bret selfish. Actually I think he really called him a shellfish. Owen is going to need a good manager to get over as a heel against anyone but Bret. 3 1/4 stars. 3. Razor Ramon kept the IC title pinning IRS in 11:30. Mainly wrist holds until the ref bump finish. IRS then went for the briefcase but Ramon got it from him and used it, but no ref to count the fall. Ramon gave IRS a backward superplex but the ref was still on the ground selling. Shawn Michaels then came out and hit Ramon with his IC title belt and the ref came to and IRS got the pin. Ref Earl Hebner then came out of the dressing room and told the original ref what happened, and at this point Ramon got IRS in the razor's edge for the pin. 1 1/2 star. 4. Yokozuna kept the WWF title beating Undertaker in 14:20 in a bizarre casket match. Yokozuna tried to use a chair but Undertaker got it and used it to Yokozuna's back and another to the head. Yokozuna then threw salt in the eyes and used the chair to the back and to the head. Yokozuna then tried to put Undertaker in the casket but he rose up. He immediately did a chokeslam and DDT and tried to get Yoko in the casket but Crush ran in. Then Kabuki, Tenryu, Diesel, Adam Bomb, Head Shrinkers, Bigelow, Jarrett and just about every heel in the promotion came out. Somehow during this Mr. Fuji got the urn from Paul Bearer. I think Jim Cornette was vomiting during all this. Bearer got the urn back and hit Cornette and Fuji with it and Undertaker made a comeback against every heel in the promotion. The least they could have done was show the babyface's dressing room door locked to explain why it was 10-on-1 with nobody coming to help. Finally Yokozuna got the urn from Bearer, KO'd him and Undertaker with it and opened it with a green smoke bomb special effect coming out. Bigelow, Samu and Fatu all came off the top on Undertaker and they got him in the casket and started wheeling him down the aisle. Then the music played and the lights went back out and on the video wall came a message from Undertaker, direct from inside the casket, largely saying that he was about to die but his spirit would live on forever and that eventually he'd be back. He then closed his eyes as if to die, and the video showed the Undertaker's spirit leaving his physical body, and a special effect showed him levitating in midair, and finally raising to the heavens, with his arms spread wide a la the crucifixion. 1 star. 5. Bret Hart and Luger tied in the Royal Rumble after 55:08. The time of the entries was said to be cut from 2 o'clock down to 1:30, although many were in the 1:40 range, because they ran long underneath. For all the praise WWF gets for out-of-the-ring production, which usually is deserved, and criticism WCW gets, ditto, at least 9 times out of 10 WCW doesn't screw up the timing underneath and have to redo main event steps because of it, while WWF either has to rush matches, slice and dice time. For example, at WrestleMania, the Bret Hart Yokozuna title change had to be cut from a scheduled 23 minutes down to 8 because they couldn't do the undercard in the correct time, and even eliminate matches. After all these years, you'd think they'd be able to correct that problem since it comes across on 3 out of 5 pay-per-view shows. Scott Steiner opened with Semu. As Semu had Scott just about over the top, it was Rick Steiner's time to come in. Rick, realizing it wasn't Japan and that means no effort is desired, required, or going to happen, walked to the ring slowly and mindlessly shook people's hands rather than add intensity to the match by acting concerned his brother was in trouble. The Steiners dumped Semu at 3:05 of personal ring time, who did a great bump choking himself on the ropes before being booted out. Kwang the Ninja, TNT, subbing for Ludwig Borga, who has a badly injured ankle and will be out for a few weeks, with manager Harvey Whippleman, was in next, and he blew Kabuki missed in Rick's eyes. Then Owen was in dumped Rick at 5:50, 4:20. Bart Gunn was the next in. At this point it became the Diesel show. Diesel dumped Bart Gunn at 8:55, 2:55 ring time, Scott Steiner at 9:04, 9:04, Owen Hart at 9:09, 4:49, and Kwang at 9:23, 6:23, to empty out the ring. Next in and out was Bob Backlund at 10:20, 50. Dumping Backlund firmly established Diesel as a babyface. He'd been getting sizable cheers at the house shows anyway, so expect a turnaround WrestleMania time. Next in and out was Billy Gunn at 11:27, 22. At this point, with nothing going on in the ring, they took us backstage showing Tenryu and Kabuki beating up Luger in the locker room with a broom. Tenryu couldn't keep a straight face doing the angle. They teased Luger wouldn't be able to come out for the Rumble. Next to play in and out was Virgil at 13:15, 41. The Diesel show ended when Randy Savage showed up, followed by Jeff Jarrett. Jarrett was surprisingly out next, via Savage at 17:13, 1:24. Crush came in, followed by Doink. As Doink was distracting the crowd, Savage was dumped by Crush in 1912, 5:05. Doink used the flower gimmick to spray Diesel and Crush, but then quickly destroyed him when Bigelow entered. Bigelow dumped Doink in 21:14, 2:24, leaving Bigelow, Crush and Diesel 40 seconds to brawl with no crowd reaction. Then in came Mabel, Sparky Plug, subbing for 1-2-3 Kid, who blew out his knee in the MSG Royal Rumble and will be out 6 to 10 weeks, and Shawn Michaels. Diesel was finally eliminated at 26:00, 18:30, via Bigelow, Crush, and Michaels, with the seed planted for the eventual Michaels-Diesel breakup since Michaels didn't help Diesel when he was in trouble and helped to dump him. The ring filled up with great workers at this point: Mo, Greg Valentine, Tatanka, and Kabuki. Luckily Michaels carried the match at this point, doing all kinds of body contortion moves to appear to be on his way out but somehow wind up still in. If any promotion in the world had 5 wrestlers with this guy's talent, they'd never have a bad show. Everyone threw Mabel out in 32-32, 10-31. Then it was time for Luger to come out, and he went right after Kabuki, didn't sell anything from his prior injury, and dumped Kabuki in 33-39, 2:05. Tenryu was in next. Luger and Tenryu went at it at this point and it wasn't pretty. Tenryu chopped Luger to death, then got ready for Lex to make his comeback. Lex didn't do anything and they both stood there. The next guy in was nobody, first said to be Bret Hart, but later said to be Bastion Booger. Rick Martel was next in, followed by a limping Hart who immediately played Ric Flair. Everyone took turns beating up on him, and Fatu. At 42-39, 25-16, Crush was dumped. In came Jannetty next, and for a few seconds, he and Michaels had the hottest exchange thus far in the show. Bomb was next in, at number 30, or 29. At this point, it was elimination time, starting with Plug at 45-22, 22-44, Valentine at 49-16, 20-50, Martel at 49.34, 11.37, Baum at 49.49, 5.41, Mo at 49.55, 23:02. You know the depth is bad when Mo isn't for that long. Tatanka at 50.17, 2019, Bigelow at 51.05, 30.36. The match Ironman, and Giannetti at 51.45, 8.57. This left Tenryu, Fatu, Michaels, Hart, and Luger. Luger and Hart together threw out Tenryu in 52.31, 17.53. At 54.49, Luger and Hart simultaneously dumped Fatu, 13.35, and Michaels, 29.33. Luger and Hart had just 24 seconds before they took a flying bump out together. Luger was first announced the winner, then Hart was, and then it was announced it was a tie. Because this is booked so much more carefully and is conceptually better because it's less unwieldy, much of this match was better than the Battle Royal at Battle Bowl. Because of the great finish and more good workers around at the end, the Battle Bowl Battle Royal was a far better Battle Royal. 2.5 stars. Ted DiBiase debuted as color commentator for the Rumble. On the surface, DiBiase would seem to be a great color commentator because he is well-spoken and has a great voice. And he may be at some point. On this show, he seemed to not be familiar with the storylines and Vince McMahon talked over him constantly. Any positive comments on his performance could only come by being impressed with his voice or because he was a good wrestler for so many years and not listening to the words that were spoken or how well he interplayed with McMahon. The Royal Rumble came just days after the WWF drew a 3.6 rating for Monday Night Raw, which made it the highest-rated show for the week of any kind on cable television. The first time in many years a pro wrestling show has occupied that spot. Raw has generally finished between number 10 and number 15 in the weekly ratings, with its highest previous finish in the cable ratings being number 4. It was the highest-rated non-special cable show in more than 1 year and an all-time record for the 53-week-old show. It was even more impressive considering the first half hour was with barely audible announcers due to technical problems. The truth is that people who only want to watch one wrestling television show each week more and more seem to be picking this one, and ratings should stay at a strong level. The Sid Audi, Sid Vicious / Marty Lunda, Arnold Anderson, stabbing incident was back in the news in a major way. A civil suit was filed by Lunda against Audi in North Carolina on January 25 asking for in excess of $10,000. North Carolina law only allows punitive damages in cases of this type to be listed as either in excess of $10,000 or less than $10,000, for assault and battery. At press time we don't have a copy of that complaint, but should have it by next week's issue, although we have been told Anderson's complaint is worded very similar to how the situation was reported in this newsletter after it happened. The October 26, 1993 in Blackburn, England incident which hospitalized both men resulted in a suspension for Lunda and the firing of Audi. The first published interview with either about the incident came out in the Wrestling Flyer Yearbook, available for $12 at P.O. Box 283, Wallingford, Pennsylvania 19086, one of the best underground publications of the year, this past week. In the 5-page interview done before Audi learned of the lawsuit, Audi criticized WCW's handling of the incident. His main claim is that the police said the chair he admitted bringing to Anderson's room wasn't used in the brawl. It is believed Anderson's version of the story, which is expected to come out in detail in court papers at some point, is the fight began when he was suckered with the chair leg. In his detailed account of the incident, Audi said the problems started in the bar after the bus ride. We got to talking about things. I felt that maybe the conversation was getting a little too much for Arnold. He chose to get away from the table, not wanting to answer some of the questions I was asking him. It got over to the bar where we started arguing a little bit, exchanging thoughts of one another. I was sitting on a bar stool. He came over to me one time and got in my face. I took my watch off, and he asked me, "What are you going to do? Beat me up?" I said, "No, but if you don't get out of my face, I will get you away from me." Audi said words were spoken until Anderson threw a beer in his face and all the wrestlers jumped in between the two. He claimed Anderson then threatened him by saying, "I'll cut your guts out with a beer bottle." Audi admitted both men were screaming at each other and claimed he voluntarily went to his room because he was tired of waiting for a sandwich, which contradicts WCW security official Doug Dillinger sending both to their room. It should be noted that in the bar there were many eyewitnesses and this version was much different than versions we received. In the brawl itself there are only two versions, Anderson's and Audi's, because the first actual witness saw nothing but Audi standing over a badly bleeding Anderson wielding the scissors after all the damage on both sides had been done. Audi then said he broke off his chair leg when he got into his hotel room and went to Anderson's doorway. I was knocking on his door telling him to come out. He was in on the other side screaming at me. Audi claimed Anderson's comments weren't making any sense but also admitted to being drunk at the time. He said that as he was in the hallway, he realized how stupid it was going down to his room. This is really stupid. He's not going to come out anyway. I've never pretended to be a big fighter. Arn's not a fighter. I think it's really out of both our characters to be in that situation. After that I remember slamming the chair down and taking no more than 2 steps away from the door, back towards me room. I turned around. Arn's there, really almost on me right away. I remember looking at Arn and the first thing I noticed was that he had something in his hand. Not thinking, I put my hands out to him wide open. I mean, I didn't have a thought he would honestly do something like that. I remember saying, "Hey, Arn, this has gone too far." At about that time, he jabbed with the scissors. When he jabbed me, I guess because of the adrenaline flow and fear, everything set in on me. I remember backing up into the doorway. I couldn't honestly tell you where I was stabbed first because I was too scared. I remember backing up to the doorway after he stabbed me a first time, and he just kept on. I knew it was just a few seconds he had to have stabbed me twice in the face, once in the gut, and once in the hand. Audi said he didn't remember anything until both of them were down and each noticed the scissors on the floor, and that remembered getting to them first but didn't remember stabbing Anderson. After the incident, Audi said the police told him when he was in the hospital that all Anderson had were 2 black eyes and tried to get him to press charges against Anderson and said his lawyer told him it wouldn't be a good idea to get tied up in the British court system. Audi scoffed at Anderson's version of the story, that Audi knocked him out with the chair leg to start the brawl, saying he believes Anderson knows it isn't true and also said that he wasn't sorry for what had happened because he was only defending himself and said in the same situation, he was sure he'd do the same thing again. He also downplayed the roid rage, claiming anyone who claimed it was a roid rage probably has no education at all about steroids to start with. That statement is ironic since the term roid rage was used largely by WCW wrestlers, virtually all of whom have personal experience not only of personal use but of consistently for years being around users. As stated here before, my belief is using roid rage as a reason is making roid rage about to be a lot more than it really is. Tons of people use steroids, and while they may in some cases make people prone to more violent actions, being on roids doesn't cause incidents like this to happen. Audi also said that if this case ever goes to court, he will walk out innocent because he was acting in self-defense. Audi also said that he did eventually take a steroid test, and claimed the reason he initially refused is because he was using it as leverage to get his new contract. AAA IWC officially canceled the 2/20 date at the Paramount in New York on January 24. The March dates in San Antonio and California are still on as scheduled, and the plan now is for April dates in New York and Chicago. Actually in this case it was AAA which canceled the date because they didn't want to take any financial risk on the show, unlike the Chicago date which was canceled largely because the original venue, Chicago Stadium, decided it didn't want the show and no other suitable venue was available that night. This continues to bring up questions as to the viability, given cultural differences, of long-term relationships between AAA, which is largely a one-man, Antonio Pena, show trying to handle a worldwide rather than small regional company on an international level, and other foreign companies. As mentioned before, in Mexico, lineups are announced and local event promotion usually doesn't start until the Monday before the show, since many arenas run cards 1, and some as often as 4 times, per week. In the United States, even though this office is attempting to draw a Mexican-American audience which is similar to the audience in Mexico in many ways, 85% walk-up business, the American end, IWC, wants to have lineups and heavy promotion in these new markets for at least 1 month before showtime. It's funny because realistically, this group is still the number 2 house show promotion in the US, but seemingly can't get it together to put on house shows, unlike WCW, which can get it together to promote dozens a month, but can't get any fans to attend them. Results: 1/5 Cuernavaca, AAA, 6,000 sellout, Espectra Jr. and Espectrito and Angel Blanco Jr. B Super Muñeco and Super Muñequito and Lizmark Jr., Los Payasos B Tony Arce and Volcano and Rocco Valente DQ, Conan El Barbaro and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover B Al Satanico and Blue Panther and La Parka. 113 Rock Hill, South Carolina, WWF, 1000, Marty Jannetty B Fidel Sierra, Owen Hart B Bastion Booger, Men on Mission B Black and Red Knight, Bam Bam Bigelow B Doink the Clown, Rick and Scott Steiner B Quebecers DQ, Casket Match, The Undertaker B Adam Bomb. 114 Indianapolis, Championship Wrestling from Indiana, Sean Casey B. PC Austin DQ, Madman Pondo B. Flash Flanagan DQ, California Dude B. Iranian Assassin B. Barroom Brawlers B. American Eagles, Danny Davis and Jerry Faith, DQ, Mike Samples B. Danny Anderson. 114 Wilmington, East Coast Wrestling Association, 320, Boogie Woogie Brown and Cheetah Master and Rocking Ronnie B. Lance Diamond and Hollywood Hunks, Glenn Osborne DDQ Superstar, Blue Thunder B. Commando, Superstars B. Shockwave, Osborne B. Eric Powers, Cowboy Blaze B. Dr. Destruction, Nikolai Volkov B. Green Haze, Mr. Excitement and Irish Mickey and Colorado Kid B. Animal and Hell Rider and Death, Kabuki Kid B. Quinn Nash. 114 Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, TWA, Bubba Humphrey B. Ken Arden, Jamie Strong B. Dr. Feelgood, Gene Spurlock and the Nightmare, Ted Allen, B. Rawhead Rex and Inferno Texas Outlaws NC Johnny Blaze and Danny Marlowe, Joel Travis and Frankie Lee and Billy Montana B. Sam Colt and Rick Justice and Widowmaker. 115 Gastonia, North Carolina, United States Wrestling Federation, 55, John Sullivan B. The Invader, Mad Dog and Flaming Youth, not PWF wrestler of same name, B. Scotty McKeever and Scotty Hotbody, Trooper Max and Texas Ranger B. Death and Destruction, Rebel Stud and Mad Dog and Ring Warrior, Jake Steele, DDQ Ozzy and Hell's Angel Cruiser and Rick Link, Funktown Kid B. Jimmy Garvin. 115 Newark, East Coast Wrestling Association, 470, Lance Diamond B. Blue Thunder, Boogie Woogie Brown B. Dr. Destruction, Quinn Nash B. Kabuki Kid, Shockwave B. Midnight Rider, Nikolai Volkov B. Johnny Heartbreak, Glenn Osborne B. Rocking Ronnie, Eric Powers B. Commando, Russian Invaders B. Colorado Kid and Cowboy Blaze, Dr. Destruction 1 Royal Rumble Battle Royal, Cheetah Master and Mr. Excitement and Irish Mickey B. Animal and Death and Hell Rider. 117 Shibukawa, FMW, 2077, Koji Nakagawa B. Mr. Chin, Masaru Toi and Dark Ranger B. Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Gasaku Gasagawara, Sabu and Damien B. Masato Tanaka and Battle Ranger, Goro Tsurumi B. Terry Sims, Crusher Matamari and Combat Toyota and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac B. Megumi Kudo and Miwasato and Yuki Nabeno and Nurse Nakamura, The Gladiator and Big Titan and Ricky Fujibi Mr. Pogo and Hisakatsu Oya and Hideki Hasaka, Barbed Wire Match, Atsushi Onita and Katsutoshi Niyama B. Tarzan Goto and Mr. Genasuke. 118 Columbus, Georgia, WCW Main Event Taping, 2,500/heavily papered, non-squash results, WCW TV title, Steve Regal B. Brian Armstrong, Arnold Anderson B. Paul Roma, Paul Orndorff and Roma B. Thunder and Lightning, Harlem Heat B. Keith and Kent Cole, WCW TV title, Regal B. Scott Armstrong. 118 Sendai, All Japan, 2,800, Mighty Inoue B. Brian Costello, Takao Mori B. Misao Inoue, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2B Chris and Mark Youngblood, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoda D. Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi and Ryuma Izumida 3500, Junakiyama and Tamon Honda B. Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Stan Hansen and John Knorr and Johnny Gunn B. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Richard Slinger, Mitsuharu Masawa and Kenta Kobashi and Satoru Asako B. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa 2338. 118 Misato, FMW, 3025, Gasaku Goshigawara B. Mr. Chin, Masato Tanaka B. Dark Ranger, Battle Ranger and Tetsuhiro Kuroda B. Ricky Fuji and Terry Sims, Crusher Matamari and Combat Toyota and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac B. Nurse Nakamura and Yuki Nabeno and Miwasato and Megumi Kudo, Sabu and Damien B. Hideki Hasaka and Goro Tsurumi, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Genasuke and Koji Nakagawa B. Mr. Pogo and Hisakatsu Oya and Masaru Toi. Barbed Wire Tournament Final to determine World Brass Knucks Tag Team Champions, The Gladiator and Big Titan B. Atsushi Onita and Katsutoshi Niyama. 118 Yokoshiba, All Japan Women, Numa Kibichi Kako Shiratori, Mima Shimoda B. Tomoko Watanabe, Bull Nakano and Atsuko Mita B. Suzuka Minami and Takako Inoue, Toshio Imada B. Saki Hasegawa, Minami Toyota and Kyoko Inoue B. Kaoru Ito and Yumiko Hata. 118 Kumamoto, JWP, 1600, prelim results unavailable, Plum Marco and Cutie Suzuki B. Candy Akutsu and Dynamite Kansai, Devil Masami B. Mayumi Ozaki. 118 Tampa, IPWA, Mr. Electricity B. The Mechanic, White Shadow B. Butch Long, Freight Train Freddy and Chris Nelson D. Jeff Bradley and Rick Thames, Lou Perez B. Sonny T. DQ, Frankie Rose B. Cuban Assassin DQ, Randy Fuller B. Ned Brady. 119 Yokohama, Pancrase, 5645 Sellout, Kazuo Takahashi B. Katsumi E. Nagaki, Ultra B. Vernon White, Ryushi Yanagi Sawa B. James Matthews, Tamatake B. Vizak, Masakatsu Funaki B. Boss Rutan, Minoru Suzuki B. Wayne Shamrock. 119 Ichino Seki, All Japan, 2200, Tommy Rogers B. Masao Inoue, Chris and Mark Youngblood B. Mitsuomo Moda and Mighty Inoue, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 B. Takawamori and Tamon Honda, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura B. Haru Kaigan and Masafuchi, Johnny Ace B. Brian Costello, Junakiyama B. Ryuma Izumida, Mitsuharu Masawa and Kenta Kobashi and Satoru Asako B. Steve Williams and Richard Slinger and Bobby Fulton, Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada and Yoshinari Ogawa B. Stan Hansen and John Knorr and Johnny Gunn. 120 I Wade, All Japan, 2500, Yoshinari Ogawa and Mighty Inoue B. Chris and Mark Youngblood, Johnny Ace B. Tamon Honda, Masao Inoue B. Satoru Asako, Ryuma Izumida and Haru Kaigan and Masafuchi B. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuomo Moda, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 B. Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Steve Williams and Richard Slinger and Johnny Gunn B. Stan Hansen and John Knorr and Brian Costello, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Takawamori B. Mitsuharu Masawa and Kenta Kobashi and Junakiyama 2703. 120 Indianapolis, Championship Wrestling from Indiana, Boxing, Mike Wyatt B. Mike Samples DQ, Flash Flanagan D. Iranian Assassin, Mr. Clyde, Texas Bandit, Kevin Haste, BPC Austin, Flanagan B. Madman Pondo DQ, Barroom Brawler and Bandit B. American Eagles, Baseball Bat Match, Danny Anderson B. Mike Samples DQ. 120 Plant City Florida, Plant City Wrestling Federation, Freight Train Freddy DDQ Bill Garrett, Randy Hogan B. Red Devil, Lucius Lupker Johnny B. Long, Ned Brady and Hassan Farouk NC Kevin Catlin and Cody Wade, Odessa Slim B. Cuban Assassin Corps, Vern Henderson B. Jerry Flynn DQ. 120 Winnipeg, River City Wrestling, Caveman Broda B. Outpatient, King of Canada and Jason the Terrible B. Pink Panther and Buddy Bundy, Stan Saxon B. Vans Nevada, Sergeant Steele and Major Impact B. Sluggo Smith and Dakota Moondog, Dave Petro B. Corporal Punishment DQ, Brian Jewell B. Robbie Royce. 121 Hershey, Pennsylvania, WWF, Sparky Plug B. Rick Martel, Diesel B. Marty Jannetty, Falls Count Anywhere, Crush B. Randy Savage Corps, WWF Tag Title, Rick and Scott Steiner B. Quebecers DQ, Doink the Clown B. Bam Bam Bigelow, Lex Luger and Tatanka B. Ikozuna and Quang the Ninja. 121 Linear, North Carolina, SMW, 350, Bobby Blaze B. Killer Kyle, Tracy Smothers B. Chris Condito, SMW Tag Title, Rock and Roll Express B. Heavenly Bodies DQ, SMW Title, Brian Lee B. Dirty White Boy 1 Battle Royal. 121 Tokyo Budokan Hall, Rings, 11,036, Andre Tsurunomize B. Allstan, Bart Vale B. Peter Smith, Eston B. Rosa, Fulcon B. Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Dick Leon Frey B. Humoff, Chris Stolman B. Nikolai Zuev, Battle Dimension 93 Tournament Championship, Akira Maeda B. Bitars Terriel. 121 Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Cow Dojo, 2,100 Sellout, Wellington Wilkins Jr. B. Rico Federico, J.R. Carson B. Suzuki, Ishinriki B. Al Snow, Pete Tazello, Tasmaniac, B. Mochizuki, James Magnum B. Kobayashi, Not Kunyaki Kobayashi, Koji Kalbi Koki Kitahara. 121 Chiba, All Japan Women, Chikako Shiratori B. Yoko, Mima Shimoda B. Numaki, Yumiko Hata and Etsuko Mita B. Suzuka Minami and Minami Toyota, Bull Nakano B. Takako Inoue, Asia Kong and Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe B. Toshio Yamada and Kaoru Ito and Saki Hasegawa. 121 Dallas, GWF, 1,100/ less than 100 paid, Modib B. Chaz Taylor, The Gladiator B. Danny Davis, not Aswa Danny Davis but a Houston wrestler of same name, Scott Putski B. Sweet Daddy Falcone, Jeep Swenson B. Black Bart DQ, Iceman King Parsons B. Action Jackson, Chris Adams B. Francis Buxton, Rod Price B. Jim Lord, GWF Tag Title, Putski and Gladiator B. Bard and John Hawk DQ, Bard and Hawk retain. 121 Campbell River, BC, Pacific Coast Championship Wrestling, 250, Mike Roselli B. Riptide Rockford, Chichok and Firefighter Adrian B. Stunning Steven the Scorpion, Michelle Star B. Rocky Delasera, Bad News Alan DDQ Timothy Flowers. 121 Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, TWA, Ken Arden B. Bubba Humphrey, Gene Spurlock and Billy Montana B. Texas Outlaws, Richie Dye and Larry Santana, Larry Santo, B. Widowmaker and Mike Collins, Rawhead Rex B. Woody Woodchuck, Joel Travis and Frankie Lee and Jimmy Golden NC Sam Colt and Rick Justice and Big Tiny Texas Outlaws B. Johnny Blaze and Dan Marlowe. 122 Yoshikawa, All Japan, Yoshinari Ogawa B. Brian Castello, Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue and Mitsuo Momoda B. Haruka Eigen and Ryuma Izumata and Masafuchi, Chris and Mark Youngblood B. Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton, Richard Slinger B. Kawamori, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 B. Steve Williams and Johnny Gunn, Giant Baba and Kenta Kobashi and Satoru Asako B. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Masawino A2150, Stan Hansen and Johnny Ace and John Norby Mitsuharu Misawa and Junaki Yama and Tamon Honda. 122 Johnson City, Tennessee, SMW, 750, Anthony Michaels B. The Hornet, Brian Keys, 1 1/2 star, Bobby Blaze B. Killer Kyle 2 stars, Tracy Smothers B. Chris Condito 2 3/4 stars, SMW Tag Title, Heavenly Bodies B. Rock and Roll Express DQ 3 3/4 stars, SMW Title, Brian Lee B. Dirty White Boy 2 stars, White Boy 1 Tri-City Rumble, Royal Rumble Rules, Battle Royal 2 1/2 stars. 122 Sekiho, All Japan Women, Yoko B. Kumiko Maekawa, Handicap Match, Bull Nakano B. Chikako Shiratori and Numaki, Mima Shimoda and Atsuko Mita B. Saki Hasegawa and Kaoru Ito, Asia Kong B. Tomoko Watanabe, Suzuka Minami and Minami Toyota and Toshio Yamada B. Yumiko Hata and Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue. 122 Monaca, Pennsylvania, Indiana, 150, prelim results unavailable, Gino Rocco B. Dave Blackheart, Preston Steele B. Psycho Mike, Lord Zoltan B. T.C. Reynolds. 122 Cloverdale, BC, West Coast Championship Wrestling, 300, Randy Tyler B. Buddy Wayne, Mighty Quinn B. Mike Roselli, Firefighter Adrian B. Riptide Rockford, Timothy Flowers and Mike Starr and Johnny Canuck B. Rocky Delasera and Bad News Allen and the Bodyguard, Portland's Silver Shadow. 122 Taylorsville, North Carolina, PWF, 107, Black Scorpion B. Terry Austin, Super Ninja B. Star Rider Texas Outlaw B. Scott Powers, George South and Russian Assassin B. Flaming Youth and Randy Sledge, Italian Stallion B. Austin Steele. 122 Portland, Oregon, Kvusa, Carl Pope B. Dane Rush, Bill Sawyer D. Minnesota Mauler 2, Minnesota Mauler I B. Carl Pope, Bruiser Brian B. Colonel De Beers to win TV title, Lumberjack Strap Tornado Match, C.W. Bergstrom and Larry Oliver B. Jesse Barr and Lou Andrews. 122 Blackville, South Carolina, American Championship Wrestling, Joe Thomas B. J. Eagle, Bambi B. Peggy Lee Leather, Johnny B. Good and Scotty Piper DDQ Ringlords, Junkyard Dog B. Lonnie Loveless DQ, Jimmy Garvin B. Pez Watley. 122 Pequannock, New Jersey, ECPW, 600, Devon Storm D. Special K, Kodiak Bear 1 Battle Royal, Hawaiian Hurricane B. Grave Digger, Rocky Jones B. Kodiak Bear, Tommy Cairo B. Johnny Rotten Core, Gino Caruso and Vito Calhoun B. Executioners DQ. 123 Baltimore, WWF, 4500, Sparky Plug B. Rick Martel, Diesel B. Marty Jannetty, Bret Hart B. IRS, Randy Savage and Lex Luger B. Quang the Ninja and Crush, Adam Bomb B. Bob Backlund, WWF Tag Title, Rick and Scott Steiner B. Quebecers DQ, Cage Match for WWF Title, Yokozuna B. Tatanka. 123 Dallas, Big D, B.A. Dalton B. Tony Glenn, Billy Travis B. Axel, Alan Dillon and Terry Black and Chris Rocks B. Broadway Danny and Mike Savage and Ray Evans, Tim Brooks B. Terry Sims DQ, Jimmy James B. Bill Irwin Core, Nick Golden and Al Brujo B. Simpson Big D, Falls Count Anywhere Street Fight, Freddie Fargo leaving vs. Shining Shoes, Mr. B. Gary Young, Fargo forced to leave town. 124 Philadelphia, WWF, 5000, Owen Hart B. Jim Powers, Sparky Plug B. Bastion Booger, Jeff Jarrett B. Marty Jannetty, Ladder Match for IC Title, Razor Ramon B. Shawn Michaels, Head Shrinkers B. Men on Mission, Falls Count Anywhere, Crush B. Randy Savage Core, Lex Luger and Tatanka B. Yokozuna and Quang. Special thanks to Shannon Rose, Dan Paris, John Lawson, Dave Pinsky, Norm Connors, Johnny Nat, Freddie Fargo, Louis Curry, Dave Shearer, Stuart Kemp, Mad Jack, Brian Hildebrand, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Jim Kettner, Tim Whitehead. UWA/EMLL. The biggest news is Mexico is the breakup of the Pro Wrestlers Union, which was comprised of UWA and EMLL wrestlers. The EMLL wrestlers this past week started their own union, claiming that several recently injured wrestlers weren't compensated by the union. In addition, several of the local promoters were complaining about the $300 union fees per show that they were required to pay to Manny Guzman. The AAA wrestlers, upon forming of their promotion, all quit and formed their own union. Guzman once again threatened a wrestlers' strike and has a meeting with the Secretary of the Interior in Mexico attempting to get pro wrestling taken off television, with the claim that the television kills the live gates, which fewer shows and thus unemployment not only of wrestlers but of people, concessionaires, for example, that the wrestling industry employs. Guzman, who has been opposed to televised wrestling from the start, continually points to the decline in the number of shows and wrestlers employed in the United States in recent years, blaming television overexposure, and wanting to keep the arena business in Mexico from taking the same southern direction, but it's a losing battle for sure because the inevitable destiny is the inevitable destiny. Silver King and Dendy are forming what I'm told is a tremendous tag team as the new Cowboys for EMLL. Enrique Vieira is turning heel for UA. Corazon de Leon, who is the EMLL's second most over babyface behind only Vampire, suddenly left the promotion telling people he was headed to Tennessee, Smoky Mountain it appears. Javier Yanez quit as EMLL booker and was replaced by the brother of referee Gato Montini. Ishinriki from War is headed in and Paco Alonso still wants to break back Earthquake John Tenta. Japan. Big Titan, Rick Bogner, and the Gladiator, Mike Alfonso, became the first FMW World Brass Knucks Tag Team Champions, winning the barbed wire tournament final match on January 18 and Misato from Atsushi Onita and Katsutoshi Niyama. If that name is unfamiliar, it is because he worked as the Great Punk last year. After the match, Hisakatsu Oya, Hideki Hasaka and Mr. Pogo hit the ring and attacked Onita. When Onita was down, woman wrestler Keiko Iwam hovered over him like a nurse over a patient and Pogo blew a fireball all over Iwam. A photo in glorious sadistic color appeared on the front page of the 120 issue of Tokyo Sports. Mr. Ganasuke tried at the last second to protect Iwam and received bad burns on his left hand and left shoulder. This was the final show of the tour and was used to heat up the next tour where Onita vowed revenge on Pogo, which will be from 211 to 225, with the only foreign men on the tour being Damien, formerly Amigo Ultra from northern Mexico, and Primo Carnera III, formerly Giant Tiger Cat from New York Indies, so this group is going more and more to a more native-based group all the way up and down the show. On that tour will be the women's tournament to crown the Independent World Women's Wrestling Champion, with first-round matches being Megumi Kudo vs. Malia Hasaka, Tampa, Lola Gonzalez, AAA, vs. Miwa Sato, Bambi, Georgia, vs. Yuki Nabeno, and Combat Toyota vs. Neftali, AAA. Getting first-round buys were Crusher Matamari, Shark Tsuchiya, and Leilani Kai, with the finals on February 25 at Korakuen Hall. FMW announced another show at Kawasaki Stadium on May 5. The same date last year was the Onita vs. Terry Funk match that drew 41,000 fans. Former sumo superstar Koji Kao's first pro wrestling show for his promotion, called Kao Dojo, drew a sellout 2,100 to Korakuen Hall on January 21, with Kao beating War's Koki Kitahara in 3:58 with a sleeper in the main event. It appears they are building toward a Kao Tenryu match in June. Americans James Magnum, Minneapolis, Pete Tazzello, Tasmaniac, and J.R. Carson, Minneapolis, were put over Japanese newcomers, all having their first match, while former sumo star Ishinriki of War beat Al Snow via submission. Rumor has it that War will send King Haku and Earthquake John Tenta to be Kao's next victims while building him up for the Tenryu match. Haku has a rep in Japan as a legitimate badass, and Tenta Kao will do business in Japan because both were sumos at the same time, and because of the incident a few years back where they had the worst match in the history of mankind because neither would cooperate. It turned into a non-shoot, in that they were no longer working, but neither man made the first move but both were waiting, and wound up with Kao telling the audience that pro wrestling was fake before they alertly cut off the juice on the ring mic. Kao also got a part, most likely playing a giant heavy on a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie called The Quest that starts filming in July for a 1995 release. Japanese women wrestlers Takako Inoue and Cutie Suzuki will be in starring role in a straight-to-video movie called Another Splendor that will be filmed in Guam. The biggest news of this coming week will probably be the announcement of a 4-city WWF tour in May, 5/7 at the Yokohama Arena, 17,000 seats, 5/8 at Nagoya Rainbow Hall, 13,000, 5/9 in Osaka Castle Hall, 15,000, and 5/11 at Sapporo Nakajima Gym, 6,800. Aki Osato and J.J. Dillon are scheduled to hold a press conference this week. Some are expecting as soon as the weekend the Japanese Sumo Association will make some sort of an announcement relating to the WWF tour because of the ring name Yokozuna appearing in Japan, where Yokozuna is a sacred term that only 60 men in history have the right to use, and he isn't one of them. Tenryu and Kabuki will appear on the show, and their help in putting the show together and using War Guys was in return for them being invited to the Royal Rumble. A sumo wrestler who used the ring name Daitoko, 30 years old, 6'4.5" and 330 pounds, who retired from sumo on January 24 after finishing his final tournament the day before, announced he was going into pro wrestling with a war group. He wasn't a famous sumo wrestler such as Tadao Yasuda, debuting next month for New Japan, Kyo, who was the best sumo and maybe the worst pro wrestler of all the sumo-turned-pro wrestlers, Tenryu, John Tenta, Ishinriki, or Akira Tao. The Two-Thirds Weekly Gong has a list of the award winners and top 5 finishers in each category of the Wrestling Observer Readers' Awards poll. All Japan's 1/16 television show drew a 3.3 rating, while New Japan's 1/15 show did a 7.1 rating. Pancrase drew a turnaway crowd of 5,645 at the Yokohama Bunka Gym for a card headlined by Minoru Suzuki, making Wayne Shamrock submit. While Suzuki was ranked third in the nation in amateur wrestling before going pro and has been a full-time submission worker for several years now, the result does make one question the legitimacy of this promotion, since most believe in an all-out shoot that none of the Japanese could handle Shamrock. There has been fax communication negotiations going on between Rings and the Ultimate Fight people in the United States. Rings finished its Battle Dimension tournament before 11,036 at Budokan Hall on January 18 with Akira Maeda winning, making Baitar's Teriel submit in the championship match. In a surprise, after the match, Maeda, who has ignored pro wrestling since Rings formed and said it was something in his past, challenged Nobuhiko Takada and Masakatsu Funaki to appear on his 3/19 show at the Yokohama Arena. The inability for Rings to sell out Budokan for its annual tournament final shows it has slipped to third place behind Pancrase and Ufi in the so-called shoot fighting popularity ranks, which caused Maeda to acknowledge his competition offices. Based on photos in last week's magazines, the one starring Jason the Terrible vs. Crypt Keeper Bed of Nails match, Crypt Keeper took the suicidal bump to lose on January 14, drew about 400 fans, which is hardly a good sign for a major show. Also, the 111 JWP match with Chigusa Nagaya vs. Mayumi Ozaki turned into a brutal bloodbath. The All Japan Asunaro Cup tournament, which will be decided this coming week, is a tournament for wrestlers with 4 or less years of experience that work for the promotion. The winner of the tournament gets elevated to star status, although Jun Akiyama, the expected winner, is already there, and will be involved in the March/April Singles Champion Carnival tournament. Aswa. Jerry Lawler's pre-trial hearing, scheduled for 1/24, was moved to 2/23 due to the ice storm closing the Louisville courthouse for several days last week that created a backlog. At the hearing, Lawler's attorney is going to petition to drop the case, claiming outrageous conduct by the government prosecutor. Lawler apparently was confident enough that he was going to get out of his legal jam because on television Saturday, Lawler brought up wanting to get back at Bret Hart, the first time he's mentioned a WWF wrestler, besides Jeff Jarrett, who was working locally as well, since his being put on ice by Titan after the indictments against him came down. The gates the past 2 Mondays, 1/10 and 1/17, in Memphis have been between $6,000 and $6,600, 1,000 to 1,100 fans, for the Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher headlining against Eddie and Doug Gilbert matches. It was noted that the return of Steve Keirn and Tommy Rich saw the crowd drop below its level of recent weeks, and increase the week after. Matt Osborne, Matt Bourne aka Original Doink, debuted at the television tapings on January 22 with bleached blonde hair as the Great Mustafa, doing a magician gimmick. He sports a flame-shooting pistol and wears a cone-headed wizard hat. He showed up during a television match with Del Rios vs. Skull Von Crush. Both looked at him and he left the ring, and they restarted the match with Skull winning. After the match, Burt Prentice came out and told a story about how Rios was shot years ago in New York, largely a true story, and showed the bullet wound in his back and front. Prentice said Rios is a world-class bodybuilder and simply needed confidence. Mike Anthony, Mike Losanki, and Jeff Gaylord and later Eddie Gilbert came out during the interview, and Eddie joked that his brother Doug was shot in the brain and they never could get the bullet out. Anthony and Gaylord had a television match with the Gilberts ending with Doug hitting Gaylord with a chain for the pin, but Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher came out and told the ref what happened and he reversed the decision. After being in the territory for months, This week they billed Anthony as one staring junior heavyweight champion, which is a title he held under the ring name Canadian Tiger. Apparently new heel manager Big Business Brown really did work at the Home Shopping Network, which was his gimmick. They are going to try and promote a major show on March 7th in Memphis. The Moondogs and Richard Lee are gone, and have been replaced by the Moondogs. The last Moondogs here were Bubba White, Splat, and Bill Smithson, Spike. The SMW Moondogs showed up this week. 124 in Memphis had Todd Morton vs. Johnny West, Reggie B. Fine vs. Del Rios, Von Crush vs. Gaylord, Anthony vs. Coco Ware for one staring junior title, Moondogs vs. PG-13 to determine who gets a title shot at the SWAT tag belts, Bruise Brothers vs. Rock and Roll Express for SWAT tag titles, and Lawler and Christopher vs. Gilberts in a death match. Junkyard Dog and Bushwhackers were scheduled to be in over the weekend on a show promoted by Lee Womack, but it fell apart before it ever happened, so they never came, and Womack also seems to be history. SMW. Both well done. In the tag team formerly known as Sudden Impact in Western Canada, Lance Storm and Chris Corazon de Leon Jericho, are expected to be headed in. Immigration work is being done on the latter team. The dates in March listed as Golden Week, 3/10 to 3/19, is actually a situation where SMW is going to promote a full schedule of house shows during the week with several major shows during that period, but not a fan convention, just that SMW wanted to alert out-of-towners that it's a good time to come in. SMW will sponsor a fan week in early August, setting up hotel entrance to matches and meetings with wrestlers for those who come from out of town. On television this week, the Moondogs destroyed a jobber they called Jason Hurd, and said he was the son of Jim Hurd. Jim Cornette and Tom Pritchard did an interview where they brought out Jimmy Del Rey as Paul Morton pretending to be Stevie Wonder. Cornette said he knocked out Morton with one punch, but then Pritchard corrected him and said that he was the one who knocked out Morton. Cornette said, "Oh, yeah, I kicked him when he was down." Cornette then said that because Ricky Morton's father is blind and Robert Gibson's mother is deaf, that if they ever got a romance together the only way they could find each other is by smell, but he said that would be easy since they both smell so bad. Mike and Doug Furnas did a taped interview saying they would rather have their face rubbed in dung than wear an Alabama sweatshirt, which they have to wear if they lose to the Heavenly Bodies on 2/13. I don't know if I believe that one. The heat was up for the Rock and Roll vs. Bodies matches over the weekend, which were the first matches since the Paul Morton angle aired. Chris Condito suffered a heel and ankle injury on January 21 in Lanier, North Carolina, taking a backdrop over the top rope, but didn't miss any matches. Here and there. The London, England tabloid News of the World had a major story about one-time pro wrestling superstar Tom "Dynamite" Kid Billington, which pointed nasty aspersions at Davey Boy Smith. Apparently Kid somehow blames Smith because the two were tag team partners for All Japan at a time when Kid's injuries were such that Smith needed to carry the team, but he felt Smith deserted him by going back to the WWF, which was the year wrestling got big on Sky Channel in England and Smith became something of a national hero. Billington, 34, who in the early 1980s was considered by many wrestlers to be the best worker in the business, now is destitute in England, went so far in the story as to blame Smith for losing his teeth, claiming Smith ducked out of a fight that he got his teeth knocked out in, which was actually a famous dressing room sucker punch from Jacques Rougeau. Billington, a pioneer of insane bumps whose career was cut short by a crippling back injury no doubt related to his risk-taking, admitted blowing all his money on drugs, booze and women, claiming when he was in the WWF he drank himself silly, needed drugs, cocaine, Valium, speed and steroids, to survive the pace, get the sleep and keep his physique. Billington claimed he turned all his financial assets over to his wife because the IRS was after him, and his wife then left him taking their children, and leaving him with nothing but a one-way plane ticket to Manchester, England. Lots more commission problems in both Oregon and Washington. According to the latest issue of Ring Around the Northwest, 2740 SE Llewellyn, Troutdale, Oregon 97060-50 cents per issue. Washington promoter Dave Dobashi held a show in December, and on the show, Buddy Rose, Mike Miller and Moondog Moretti wrestled without licenses in spite of being warned by Commission Inspector Bob Piott. The result is that all three received 3-month suspensions in the state, and Dobashi was told his promoter's license was being permanently taken away. The wrestlers claimed they requested paperwork to get licensed, but the state sent them security guard applications rather than pro wrestling applications. Dobashi was told his license was revoked for using the unlicensed wrestlers, that his ticket numbers weren't in order. He was abusive to the inspector and his lineup wasn't turned into the state in a timely fashion. Dobashi claims he's still going to run and the commission says if he does, the police will shut down the show. According to the newsletter, however, when Sandy Barr last promoted in Washington, in Vancouver, across the river from Portland, that no inspector even attended, Barr used 2 unlicensed wrestlers and Barr himself was allowed to fill out the inspector's report. The hearing regarding Barr's license to promote in Oregon has not made a decision. Even if the decision is made against Barr, he will still be able to run shows pending an appeal. Elton Owen, a longtime wrestling promoter in Oregon, brother of Don Owen, passed away on December 31 at the age of 78 of Parkinson's disease. Owen promoted cities in southern Oregon until the late 70s or early 80s for Brother Don's circuit. Elton was something of a shooting fanatic and used to offer guys $25 bonuses. This is when wrestlers' pay was obviously not much, if their matches would be shoots. Rather than put themselves at risk, as well as their opponents they'd have to work with nightly, the wrestlers would work Elton by working shoots and getting the bonuses, and supposedly he never knew the difference. Giant Warrior, Butch Masters, is currently recognized as World Super Heavyweight Champion in South Africa. ECW attendance at the 1/8 television tapings in Philadelphia was between 330 and 340, with about 150 paid, rather than 150 in total as reported here. ECW will have a weekly time slot of Network America, a new cable channel that begins operation in April. Vern Langdon reports to us that Slammer's gym in Studio City, just miles from the epicenter of the 117 earthquake, came out with only minor damage. Correction from last week, the 129 Powerhouse Wrestling show featuring the debut of J.R. Benson as manager will be in Streator, Illinois. Another correction when it was stated Ric Flair was the first wrestler to be invited to the Dapper Dan Sports Banquet in Pittsburgh. According to one report, Bruno Sammartino has attended the banquet in the past but stopped because he had a problem with the sports editor of the newspaper that sponsored the event. The other is that Bruno was invited once, but turned down the invitation because he didn't like what the sports editor had written on pro wrestling, but Flair wasn't the first wrestler invited to the banquet. The latest in fire tricks involving Mike Samples took place on January 20 in Indianapolis in his baseball bat match with Danny Anderson. Samples lit the baseball bat on fire and hit Anderson with the bat, setting him on fire. Crowds in Indy have dropped in recent weeks with the elimination of all the name talent. Curt Hennig, Sting and Jim Neidhart were all in Orlando this past weekend filming episodes of Thunder in Paradise. TV Guide gave the show a mention as a coming show, basically saying it won't be a good show, but it's got a winning formula, Baywatch with a boat. At the NatPeak convention being held this week, the WWF, Vince McMahon, Linda McMahon, Undertaker, Randy Savage, Yokozuna, Mr. Fuji, Jim Cornette, etc., WCW, Bill Shaw, Ric Flair, Bobby Heenan, Gene Okerlund, Rick Rude, Johnny B. Bad, etc., and Thunder in Paradise, Hulk Hogan, Jimmy Hart, etc., all were scheduled to have extensive displays. Dennis Coralluzzo had to cancel his 1:30 free show in Elmwood Park, New Jersey because the pipes in the building froze and it'll be scheduled for March. Texas indie manager Freddie Fargo is moving from Dallas. His final show was on January 23 for Big D in a Mr. vs. Gary Young match where if Mr. lost, he'd have to shine Fargo's shoes, but if Fargo lost, he'd leave town. Fargo's attempted interference backfired and Young lost. After the match, Young beat up Fargo and left him laying with a piledriver. GWF ran a trial show on January 14 without all the free tickets being given out and still drew 500 fans to the Sportatorium, which was fairly impressive. The next week, the free tickets were back and there were 1,100 fans, but only around 80 paid. North American Wrestling Association in Clover, South Carolina on March 19 has Wahoo McDaniel, Ivan Koloff and Greg Valentine. WWF announcer Gorilla Monsoon now appears daily under his real name, Bob Marella, as co-host with former WWF announcer Sean Mooney on a Baltimore weekday 10 a.m. show called Bingo Break. Although the show doesn't acknowledge him as Gorilla Monsoon, there are jokes made about him being the first Italian from Manchuria. When Monsoon wrestled in the early 1960s against Bruno Sammartino as a heel managed by Wild Red Berry, he had a gimmick where he was the Manchurian Giant. The show is the brainchild of former WWF television producer Nelson Swegler, hence the Mooney/Marella connection, described as a combination of Bingo and the old TNT, with an Uncle Ned hillbilly character, as Bingo Psychic and more, and has already been described as one of the worst television shows in history. Never fear, the Baltimore run is said to be a 13-week trial before the Fox network picks it up nationally. The 114-20 Los Angeles Weekly had a cover story on Lucha Libre. Most lucha aficionados loved the story, and the reporter has to be given credit for doing one hell of a lot more research, to the extent of going to Mexico City to attend a show at Arena Coliseo, visit the National Museum of Lucha Libre and find out just who Super Barrio is. Then 99% of the reporters that do wrestling stories, and it showed as his accuracy level was far better than most media wrestling stories. Still, he went overboard on the symbolisms. A lot of people who write about wrestling from the outside tend to write more into it and make it more complicated than it really is. Wrestling promoters don't spend hours in social discussion before booking matches as a morality play, they simply come up with gimmicks, some good, some bad, and book matches, and hope it draws. The article stated the total attendance for pro wrestling during a calendar year in Mexico is 76 million, which sounds incredibly inflated. In comparison, for the entire United States in 1993, the number was probably right at 2 million, and in Japan it was also probably close to 2 million. There is no doubt somewhere between 6 and 10 times as many fans attend pro wrestling in Mexico than the United States or Japan because so many more shows are run, which results in hundreds of wrestlers employed full-time and thousands part-time. I'd estimate the real number for Mexico at between 13 and 20 million. According to this week's Variety, a second Ultimate Fight pay-per-view show will take place on March 11 once again from Denver, and the hype will be built around a Japanese full-contact karate champ Minoka Ichihara representing his country's honor against Royce Gracie. Like the first show, there will be 8 competitors including an American sumo wrestler billed as 6'8", 610 named Emmanuel Yarbrough. The only pro wrestler involved will be Ken Shamrock, who was the second most impressive on the first show, which must have done at least decent on pay-per-view to come back with another one so quickly. Bruise Brothers are headed to ECW on the 25th show to face Public Enemy, also JT Smith vs Mike Awesome, FMW Gladiator. AAA IWC. The Galavision shows this weekend saw the Saturday show air a 1/5 card from Cuernavaca, plus the main event from the 1/9 Guadalajara show, which drew almost 20,000, which was Conan El Barbaro and Octagon and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover vs Cien Caras and La Parca and Blue Panther and Fuerza Guerrera. The latter show was the one where Great Sasuke from Japan was attacked by the heels before the match, however the television picked up after the attack so the angle never aired on television. However, the announcers referred to El Gran Sasuke being attacked before the match by Fuerza Guerrera as the two are to feud. Go figure. The recent main events have been hotter than usual because of the confrontations between La Parca and Heavy Metal. In Cuernavaca, Metal did a moonsault from the top rope to the floor backwards over the post that outdid anything Masao Ihara has done. Some talk that when Tiger Mask comes, he'll be programmed to feud with Black Tiger as in Japan, with Eddie Guerrero donning the new gimmick. Pena met with Mil Mascaras about coming in while both were in Japan, although Mascaras' demands were said to be too high. Los Payasos, the Three Clowns, continue to get a super push and even beat Los Hermanos Dinamita in their hometown of Lagos de Moreno. They are doing a gimmick with them that every week on television they increase their winning streak until it gets to 100 or so. While this is not unheard of in wrestling, it is somewhat unusual, in that IWC promoter Ron Skoller agreed to pay the Americans he booked for the New York show that has since been cancelled half of their agreed-upon pay, even though the card won't take place since many of them gave up bookings they could have had for the weekend. WCW. The only show of the past week was a Sunday main event taping on January 18 in Columbus, Georgia that was largely uneventful. They did a 3-week program a la the Great Todd Champion feud involving TV champ Steve Regal and Bryan and Scott Armstrong, ending with Regal retaining his title against both men. Barry Darsow, Demolition Smash / Repo Man / Crusher Khrushchev, and The Patriot, Del Wilkes, debuted. Talk was that Darsow and Arnold Anderson would form a Minnesota Wrecking Crew type team. Mongolian Muller was scheduled to debut at the tapings but was frozen in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The only other angle is they were going to do a Steve Austin vs Brian Pillman match, but Austin came out with his arm in a sling and they did the old broken arm trick. Sling is a phony, heel attacks face from behind and leaves him laying. Kevin Sullivan debuts at the 131 tapings and will to a Sunday television feud with himself and the Equalizer against Cactus Jack and Max Payne. Talk is both Brad Rheingans and Steve Keirn are looking for road agent positions. During the March WCW Germany tour they will be holding a tournament for the European Cup Championship, adding yet another title. Tour dates are 3/8 to 3/20, during which period, WCW won't be running anything significant in the U.S. WCW Saturday Night on January 15 drew a 2.5 rating, while Main Event did a 1.5 and Power Hour a surprisingly high 1.8. Here's a first. Cactus Jack was on the Wrestling Insider show over the weekend, and when the subject of him winning the Bruiser Brody Award came up, he said that he didn't deserve it for this past year. He said Vader did. WWF. Apparently the deal behind the Undertaker's situation is that back in November he asked for time off because he just had a baby and wanted to spend more time home with him, so he'll be off the road for a few months before some sort of dramatic return is arranged. Ludwig Borga suffered an ankle injury, which has been reported in several places as a broken ankle, although that isn't confirmed, and has been off the road and replaced by Kwang at the house shows. Sparky Plug's arena debut was moved up as a replacement for 1-2-3 Kid, who blew out his knee on January 17 and will be out approximately 6 weeks. According to newspaper reports, Summit Media Group and Titan Sports are each 50% owners of the New World Martial Arts Federation, a show planned for syndication starting in September. The story said Summit Media approached Titan about the concept, because they were looking to create a kickboxing version of the WWF, and Titan went in halves with the 26-episode projected that is being budgeted at between $3 and $3.5 million. Besides the record-breaking 3.6 for Raw on January 17, All-American did a 2.0 and Mania 1.6 that weekend. Expect this coming week's ratings to be the highest in years because Mania was hyped more than ever with the live drawing, and the controversy should have led to good numbers for television Sunday and Monday. If not, then it's a very bad sign. Expect WrestleMania to be sold out in rapid order. A sign of the times. In previous years when WWF did a Saturday night pay-per-view or Saturday night television special, in the markets where the Cindies run on Sundays rather than Saturdays, a different voice track acknowledging the previous night's events is put on the show. In at least the markets we've heard from, on the Sunday Cindies, they were still plugging the Royal Rumble tonight. In addition, on the 124 Raw, they were plugging 1-2-3 Kid vs Johnny Polo as the 131 headliner, when by 118 they knew Kid wasn't going to appear because of the injury, but apparently the spot had already been taped. The previous week they did a false plug advertising a Hearts vs Head Shrinkers headliner for 124, when such a match wasn't taped. The Raw show that aired 124 was taped 1/10 1 week before the plug even went on the air, in Richmond to begin with. In the case of the former, it probably isn't as much false advertising and not paying as much attention to detail work as in years past. In the case of the latter, it was just false advertising since that match obviously would be more attractive than Men on a Mission vs Shrinkers that actually aired. Shane Douglas. If arena reports are correct, then I should warn independent promoters about booking Shane Douglas. If the reports are inaccurate, please help me clarify the details. In late November or early December, Shane Douglas agreed to work the Midwest Territorial Wrestling debut card in Taylor, Michigan on January 8. I sent him an airline ticket and some upfront money, for which I have the canceled check, and began billing him in the main event. Around 12:28, Douglas informed me he had separated his shoulder and needed surgery. I had no reason to believe he would lie to me as we knew each other from when I promoted Detroit for WCW. So I offered my sympathies. He said he'd return the plane ticket and front money, and I scrambled to change the main event of my debut card. I managed to change some of the newspaper ads and press releases in the week leading up to the show, and sent a notice to all the fans on my mailing list. Word reached me on January 14 that Douglas had worked 1/8 in Philadelphia against Terry Funk, that they had been scheduled to work an angle for ECW on January 7 in which his shoulder was to be injured, which would be the reason he wouldn't want to perform in Michigan the next day, but that the show was moved to 1/8 because of the bad weather on January 7. I called Shane. I was going to call him anyway because I hadn't received the ticket or front money 2 weeks after he said he would send it, and he danced around it, saying he was in Philadelphia but that he did some announcing, didn't wrestle, that he also had heard the reports he had wrestled Terry Funk but they were inaccurate. I know how occasional misinformation can be spread, so I again wished him luck, gave him my address one more time and said I hoped we could do the booking sometime in the future. The torch came the next day with a report of Shane working a 45-minute draw with Funk on January 8. What pisses me off even more than being pimped on the booking is the fact he tried to work me like some goddamn mark. It was the ultimate lack of respect. After 20 years of being close to the business, I wouldn't have liked the last-minute change, but would have preferred to hear what seems to be the truth. He's doing an angle for ECW, he has more potential income with ECW and he'd rather work with Funk in Philadelphia than Johnny K9 in Taylor, and he could have asked to be let out of his prior commitment. I understand opportunity. I wouldn't have liked it, but I would have understood. In return, Maybe he could have offered to do a shot for me in the future at a bargain rate. As there is little money to be made in promoting independent wrestling, I assume many of us are in it with some passion, honor and commitment to the wrestling business, which may indeed show a little mark in me. Gary Wierenschik. Midwest Territorial Wrestling. On January 8, Midwest Territorial Wrestling made its debut in Taylor, Michigan. For a few months, Shane Douglas was advertised in the main event against K9, Dog of War. It was advertised on television with this main event. About 10 days before the show, Douglas told the promoter he couldn't appear due to a shoulder injury, and the promoter had to send out a letter to everyone on his mailing list that the main event would be changed. When I was reading the results in the 117 Observer, I noticed Douglas wrestled a 45-minute draw against Terry Funk that same night in Philadelphia. I'm aware Douglas is a major star for ECW and that its TV tapings date was changed, but did he have to lie and claim a shoulder injury? The promoter ended up losing money on a round-trip ticket and wasn't given enough lead time to get a name-caliber wrestler for his main event. I've read and heard interviews about how Shane Douglas says he's been mistreated in this business. I know people get mistreated every day in wrestling. But I feel sorry for any student who has Troy Martin as his teacher after he leaves the wrestling business. Adam Kane. Farmington Hills, Michigan. Japan. I'm probably madder at the Japanese scene than the American scene right now because I expect nothing from WWF and WCW, so they don't disappoint me. There's one exception. Monday Night Raw was Vince McMahon's best creation since Hulk Hogan, and he blew it in less than 6 months. I really have to wonder about the thought processes that go on down the street. New Japan is a sorry mess. This whole angle with the skinheads makes New Japan look like WCW. The Jurassic powers only add to that. New Japan needs another Akira Maeda to come along and rattle its cage, or it'll start to suffer badly. I was sorely tempted to put Jushin Liger down as most unimproved. He's been wasted worse than Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Owen Hart combined. I can't believe the same guy who had those matches with Naoki Sano 4 years ago is now jobbing for Tenryu and Kabuki. The blame goes to the jackasses that book New Japan, I'll admit, but his matches lately aren't that great. He spends far less time in the air and he's gained a noticeable amount of weight. His V-shape now looks like an X. He's grown stale from a lack of good opponents. He and Chris Benoit have been fighting forever. His program with El Samurai ran out of gas. Ultimo Dragon spends all his time in Mexico and Naoki Sano. Now there's a waste. Shinjiro Otani is going to be the best junior heavyweight wrestler in Japan in 5 years, and Osamu Nishimura will be right behind him. In All Japan, the junior heavyweight division is a total waste. The title is wasted on Masafuchi, who has a great career ahead of him in comedy matches. All Japan women have suffered for one reason. They've worked too many of their girls into the hospital and have been forced to do inter-promotional feuds. FMW and LLPW, with the exception of Shinobu Kandori, have no business dragging down the work rates of the AJW shows. I hope the brass smartens up and realizes they are killing these girls. All Japan is the best testimony to the sorry state of wrestling in the United States. The Patriot, The Eagle, Doug Furnas, Dan Crawford, Richard Slinger and Joel Deaton could all probably find work in the United States. Patriot and Eagle are tailor-made for the WWF. Yet they all stay in Japan, yet are almost constantly jobbing. But for better money, better treatment and less traveling, what choice would you make? Andy Patrizio. Stamford, Connecticut. Worldwide. The 1-1 episode of WCW Worldwide really angered me. The Starrcade Update segment hosted by Gene Okerlund provided still shots from the event hall of the WWF after its pay-per-view shows. However, these weren't photos from Starrcade. They were from the November Clash. In the shots, Flair wore red tights while he wore purple at Starrcade. The 3-count shown was the ultimate screwjob 3-count from the Clash. The photos of Austin Rhodes were just as bogus as they were from the Halloween Havoc match. Austin had a different robe on and wasn't bleeding at the end. Furthermore, Okerlund said that Austin won the match due to outside interference from Colonel Parker, which wasn't the finish that took place. It was an insult to everyone who bought the show. Ian Goodwin. Brooklyn, New York. McMahon. I was watching an old film on American Movie Classics starring a young Fred McMurray. He sure looks a lot like Vince McMahon. Same hairstyle. Even the same clothes. Check it out. What was the story on Rob Bartlett on Monday Night Raw? What happened? Why hasn't Paul E. Dangerously ever worked in the WWF? What's the background of Johnny Polo? He showed some wrestling ability against Marty Jannetty. Any chance of Sherry returning to the WWF now that they have a women's champ? R.J. Dari. Parts unknown. DEM, Vince McMahon was the original son of Fred McMurray who somehow disappeared early in the series, which is why they had to adopt Ernie as the third son. He slightly changed his last name because he was so embarrassed that his father smoked a pipe regularly on television. McMahon detests cigarette smoke to the point he's using guys whose steroid-gorged physiques got them into the business as role models, telling kids smoking is bad for you, or even showing videos of chain smokers doing public appearances telling kids not to smoke. Vince's introduction to wrestling came when Fred introduced him to his longtime golfing buddy, Fred Blassie. I don't know if Uncle Charlie was his real uncle, but please don't tell me that the assassin in those days looked like Uncle Charlie and even dressed the same just because you've never seen them both in the same place at the same time. In those days, there was a tag team called the Assassins in Atlanta. I guess Jody Hamilton ate the other guy. That joke was stolen from the Wrestling Chatterbox newsletter, but it was so good I had to fit it in somewhere. Seriously, whatever happened to that third son? Must have been one of those Dusty Rhodes angles that's dropped in midstream. Maybe the third son was blackmailed by Baby Doll, who had an envelope of incriminating pictures and was threatening to send them to Fred. Next thing you know, somebody will be writing that Eric Bischoff looks like John Davidson. Rob Bartlett was a comedy writer for Don Imus, a New York AM DJ who makes a ton of money, and the idea was for him to bring comedy to wrestling broadcasts. The idea didn't work because telling jokes about monster heels that took away their heat hurts in the ticket-selling department, which is the backbone that supports the company he was working for. He was dumped after 13 weeks when it became obvious that Bobby Heenan was much funnier than a professional comedian. Paulie once had a tryout as an announcer, but his long-term goals were more oriented toward positions in wrestling that he would never achieve within the course of his lifetime working for Titan Sports. Johnny Polo wrestled for 7 years as Scotty the Body and later Scotty Flamingo. Hopefully in that time he picked up a few moves, but I guess not as many as Mo or Mabel, or else he'd be a full-time wrestler in the WWF. Sherry, by all accounts, doesn't want to wrestle anymore, which is why she works in the corner as a manager on indie shows rather than wrestles. She's 36 and has taken more than her fair share of crazy bumps, and it adds up. You can never say never, but my feeling is if she were to return at any point to the WWF, it would not be as a wrestler. Her reasons for leaving were wanting to spend more time at home with her son after being on the road constantly for so many years. Good wrestler. Over the past year, I've been training as an amateur wrestler, and this has led me to reevaluate the way I assess what a good wrestler is. I tend to think the current trend to more spectacular moves wouldn't be necessary if people gave some credence to basic throws and submissions. Obviously this would require a shift in focus by the promoters to a more real style of wrestling. I'm prepared to accept the UFI line that we're not like those pro wrestlers. It's a line to work, but if it helps in increasing fans' enjoyment by allowing them to get the same rush out of a simple submission as they get out of a moonsault, then it's not a bad thing, and it certainly makes it easier for less spectacular but more competent workers to get over. Ben Scanlon. Yarralumba, Australia, Inland. 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 Yarralumba, Australia,